All right, so let's talk about the new MongoDB assignment. So up to this point, we have been implementing a set of quizzes that students can take for courses, right? So in the previous assignment, we implemented a list of quizzes that users could navigate to a particular quiz and see several questions that they can answer for those questions, right? For those quizzes. And right now, the grading is happening on the client, right? You can click on a button to grade the question, and it tells you whether it's correct or wrong, and then highlight the correct answer and highlight your wrong or correct answer. So what we're going to do for this upcoming assignment, we're going to now store those submissions, right? So that it'll be sent over to the server, and then the server can keep track of all the submissions that have been made for a given quiz. So the idea would be that if I log in and I take a quiz, that I could see all the attempts that I have made for that quiz. Okay, so we're going to also store all the data that we had for the quizzes. Up to this point, they have been stored as hard-coded arrays on the Node.js server. So we're going to move all that and create quizzes and questions. We're going to move them to be represented in the database, right? So that we can render them dynamically from a user interface by retrieving the data from Node.js back by a MongoDB database, as opposed to retrieving just an array of hard-coded quizzes and questions. So first we'll need to create the schemas that can represent the questions. If you remember, the questions could be either a true-false question or multiple choice question, right? And the questions had title, the questions had the actual question, right? Then the correct answer. If the question was a multiple choice question, we also had the various choices for that question. We're also going to add here a new field called answer. We're going to use that answer, right, to be able to store a copy of the answer that a student might have given, right? So that we can at some point later on, if we want to look at all the answers from everyone, we can reproduce the original question, right, and what the student answered for that particular question, and we can render that for them and say, look, this was the original question, this was the correct answer, this is the answer that you made, and then we can highlight the question as an answer, right, from the student. So this is going to represent all the questions. Notice that we're going to store all those questions in a collection called questions in Mongo. We're going to export that, and then we're going to use the in a separate schema. We're going to represent the quizzes for the quizzes, right? We're going to have a whole bunch of quizzes. So each quiz, right? Each quiz is going to have a reference. Right? It's going to be made up of an array of questions. Right? So a quiz is made up of a whole bunch of questions, and the way we're going to keep track of it is that a question is going to have an array of references to questions. Okay. Notice that this is a one-to-many relationship between one quiz having many questions, right? Notice that if this were a relational database, the way we would have modeled this, the way we have implemented it, is that the child question would have a foreign key back to the quiz, right? So that we could say that one quiz has many questions, right? So, but the way you implement that in a relational database is that the children always have references to the parent. We could have done the same thing here, right? Where the question would have had maybe a reference back to the parent, and that would have worked just as well, right? Just like we would expect in a relational database. But here, Mongo gives us the alternative implementation of having the parent keep track of all the different parts, right? So the whole is made up of the parts, right? The quiz is made up of the parts of each one of the questions. In addition, the same questions, we could say that the same question could have been used by many other quizzes. You know, you could have quiz 1 and quiz 2 share the same question, right? In that case, the single foreign key going out from the question to a parent quiz, right? That would have not worked, right? We could have not implemented, two quizzes using the same question using a foreign key like in a relational database. Instead, right, we would have had the need to have a mapping collection, right, that says that these questions are being used by these quizzes. But here we don't need that, right? We can just have a quiz, just having an array of all the quizzes that make up that particular quiz. Okay. So in addition, we're going to keep track of the attempts, right? So if I can take maybe the quiz multiple times, right? I take it today, I take it tomorrow, and so here we could see we're going to store all the different attempts for a particular quiz in a new schema called quiz attempts. Okay. Now the quiz attempts is going to have a score, right, of what did you get for the particular quiz, for that particular attempt. It's also going to have a reference to the quiz that this attempt was made for. So you submit this attempt at a particular quiz, and I have a reference, so I know that this quiz attempt was made for that particular quiz. And then we're going to have here all the different answers that you submitted. Right? So when you submit a quiz attempt, we're going to get all the original questions. Right? So you're going to see the questions in your user interface. You're going to select all your answers, and then you're going to submit an attempt. Right? So what's going to come to us from the client is a copy of your entire quiz with all your questions. Right? So they're going to be submitted. Each one of these questions is going to look like this, right? One question might be a true/false, another question might be a multiple choice. It'll have the original correct answer, the original questions, and it's going to have your particular answer, right, embedded in there. So, and it's going to be made an array of those. Now, notice that this is it's not an array of references. It's not an array of references to the original questions. This is a copy of the questions that is going to be embedded, inside of these answers. Now, when you embed something like this and you get a copy, oftentimes folks might be concerned that there might be some redundancy, that you're storing this, in multiple different places. But it's not true here, right? Because when you submit, right, we are storing the entire copy in there. It's not like it's being referenced from different places, right? It's really just one single copy, right, of your original answer. It's not like it's going to change over time either, right? You're going to submit it, and that's it. You're not going to be able to ever change this ever again, right? It's like a timestamp of the particular values at that particular point in time, right? So we're going to store the actual answers embedded inside of these answers. And we're going to store all this in the quiz attempts. Also, we're going to do the validation on whether you got the right answer, yes or no. We're going to do it at the server side as opposed to on the client side. Right now, in the previous assignment, we were grading the questions, right, on the client. Right? We were comparing your answer against the correct answer and then highlighting them appropriately, which is fine. But the ultimate grading really should only ever happen on the server side. All right, so that's the schema. That's the structure of the data that we're going to be building. Each one of these schemas needs a mongoose model that is going to provide all the CRUD operations for each one of these, right? So we'll have the question model, we'll have the quiz attempt, right? And finally oh, wait a minute, quiz attempt. Uh-oh. Did I copy this? This meant to be quiz model and quiz schema. So this is quiz schema. Yeah, this was a copy paste error. And this is the attempt. There we go. This is the attempt. So these are just the 3 models for the 3 different schemas. Okay, they're going to provide all the CRUD operation. All right, so these models are going to provide some really low-level generic functions like create, find, update, remove. Right, those are very generic using the quiz model here. Sorry, quiz model. Oops. And so what we're going to do is that instead of using the very low-level API for the model, the mongoose model, instead we're going to wrap it. We're going to wrap that low-level API around with a much higher level API that is specific to the use cases that we want to implement. So the way we do that, right, is that we create a DAO object or class, right, that provides these high-level functions like find all questions, so which wraps around this low-level implementation of using the find by ID and whatnot. And so we'll implement the find all questions, find questions by ID, find the questions. If you give me the quiz, I can retrieve what the questions are, and we're going to use the same find. Notice that this DAO is using 2 different models, right? It's using the question model to use retrieve all the questions or retrieve a particular question. But for retrieving all the questions for a quiz, it's going to use the quiz model, right, to find a particular quiz and then populate the questions, right? Remember that the quiz model, if you remember the quiz schema, it contains the questions. See that? So to retrieve the questions for a quiz, we have to first retrieve the quiz itself and then retrieve what the questions were for that particular quiz. Right? So that's what we're implementing right here. Right? Retrieve first a quiz and then kind of join. Right? Remember, populate is almost like a join. Right? Is retrieve for me that particular field. Right? It's a little bit more like in Java lazy loading. Right? We don't load the IDs unless you specifically ask for them. Right? And then we return just the questions. Was there a question? We'll do the same thing for the DAOs for the quizzes. Right? Retrieve all the quizzes, retrieve a particular quiz by ID. And finally, the attempts. The attempts are going to have two functions. One is given a particular quiz, give me back all the attempts that were made for the particular quiz. Or the create attempt is when you post a new attempt, right? We want to insert that into a database, right? We'll store the original quiz ID and the actual attempts you're going to post in the body, right? And we're going to score you. The score will be, we're going to pass all the attempts, which is basically all the questions. We're going to iterate over them, and we're going to compare your answer with the correct answer, and we're going to count how many you got right, right? And your score will be the percentage of how many you got right over how many questions there were multiplied by 100, assuming that all the questions have the same weight. Then the original services that we might have written in previous assignments, right, that were using the hard-coded arrays, we're going to replace those, right, so that instead of using the arrays, right? They're going to be using the DAOs now, right? Before, find all questions was just returning an array, right? And question by ID was just filtering that array for a particular quiz. So we're going to replace that, right? We're going to refactor them so that they use now our brand new DAO. Same thing for quizzes, right? Quizzes, we were using arrays, right? So we're going to replace that to use the DAOs. The controllers, right? They used to use these services, and these services were written in sequential, using normally programming paradigms, right? Where things execute from top to bottom, from left to right, and quiz and the queries, right, are all synchronous. But because now these DAOs underneath are using these asynchronous calls, right, we need to rewrite the controllers, right, so that instead of doing a response JSON service find questions for a quiz, so we're going to replace that so that we're going to first do the query to a database, and then we're going to use right, to come back with the response, and then finally send it back to the client. So we're going to have to refactor this a little bit so that they use now this new technique of everything being asynchronous. Same thing for the controllers for the quiz, right? We're going to have to rewrite them so that now they use the asynchronous services, right? And we're going to build one additional controller that wasn't there before, right? We're going to, so that we can post our submission, submit our quiz, right, and pass a brand new attempt, and then later on retrieve those attempts for the quiz, for the UI, so that the UI can render it. Once we have all the controllers, we gotta make sure that we we add all the controllers. So this is not needed. We add all the controllers and tie them into the server. Now on the client side, we're going to have to refactor a couple of things, right? Remember, we have two questions, right? We have the multiple choice questions, and we have the multiple choice and the true false. For both of them, if you remember, we had the input, right, which is being fed from the outside, right, using this input as an attribute. We're going to leave that alone. What we're going to do now is, if you remember, we did have an answer in the previous assignment. Well, we're going to bind that answer so that right now, when you grade a question, you can grade a question individually. Right? What we want to do is that when we submit, right, when we submit the quiz, we need to ask each one of the questions, hey, what was the answer for each one of the questions, right? We need to have access, so the parent, right, that is iterating over all the quizzes and rendering them, right, needs to be able to go and ask each one of the questions and say, hey, what was the answer for question 1? What was the answer for question 2? Well, I need all that information, right? And I'm going to bind it to the array of all the questions, and then once I have all the questions, and all the answers, I'm going to send them, I'm going to post it as to the server. So we're going to bind the answer, right? It used to just be a regular string, but we're going to bind it so that it can be bound from the outside, right? And also we can notify if the answer changes. We're going to notify our parent, say, hey parent, our answer changed, right? Each question needs to be submitted, right? Each question individually needs to be submitted, and then we can submit the entire quiz. So we need to refactor the quiz component when it was we were iterating over all the questions, right? Here's where we pass down the question to each one of the question components so they can be rendered. But here's where we're going to bind. We're going to bind the answer that the user made, right, with the student made. We're going to bind it, right, with this new answer element attribute of the question, right? And this maps to the answer that we're going to submit to the server, right? So we do that for all the types of questions. And finally, there's a submit quiz button where we call submit, right? And we take all the questions, right? This was the array of all the questions from the quiz that we're iterating, and we're going to post it. We're going to post the attempt for a particular quiz, and that's going to be sent over to the server. The server is going to receive the post right here. It's going to do a create, and it's going to do an insert, right? It's going to do a create in the DAO. In the DAO, where's the... Oh, I didn't provide the DAO for the attempts. All right, I'll provide the DAO for the attempts. I did not provide it. Service. Oh no, these are the services. Sorry. Oh, there it is. Yes. Yeah. Here's the here's the attempts DAO. Excellent. So here's where it creates the attempts, right, and stores it in the database. Yeah, I already provided that. Good. So this is how we send it over. Right, we send it over to that controller and then saves it as an attempt. Okay. I actually need to add an additional one little thing. Remember when we were displaying each one of the quizzes as a list of quizzes? Well, we need to add one more thing in there. We need to be able to show for each quiz, we need to show the score for each one of the quizzes, right? So yeah, so I'll add that as the last this list of components, a list of quizzes. So this is the quiz, but we have another component called the quizzes component that lists all the quizzes, right, as a list. We want to display also the score that you got for that particular quiz. So I'll add that here. You need to obviously deploy this to a remote server that's running the Angular, the Node.js running on Heroku. Also for MongoDB, right, the database, locally it can point to the local database, but when you deploy it on Heroku, it needs to point to a remote MongoDB instance, right? And I'm suggesting that you use MLab. Heroku provides integration with MLab, which allows you to host MongoDB instances online. Okay. All right. That's the Mongo database assignment.